Like perhaps many of you, growing up as a kid, I had hobbies, extracurriculars. Not like most of you, maybe growing up playing soccer or cricket, football, baseball. I grew up on the beach, as you know, so we were into water sports like swimming and surfing out in the sun. Those hobbies and sports, those activities, while they're great exercise for kids, they're also helpful as we grow into adults. The exercise is obvious: to stay fit and to stay healthy. But those types of activities, it doesn't have to be physical. You could be into stamp collecting. Baseball cards used to be a big thing. Coin collecting, postcards, some type of distraction, if you will. One time I got into bookbinding. How to bind your own book. And so I spent numerous hours researching and reading and watching instructional videos. Bought some materials and began to bind my own books, the cover and a leather back and all that. But I found myself most involved in those extracurriculars when there was some stressful event going on. In the middle of some difficult situation, whether it was at home or at work or whether it was with the family, the larger family, something to distract me from worrying about the problems that I was facing. Each and every one of us, we have those types of things. And as long as it's not excessive, they can be healthy avenues to distract you from the humdrum routine. These are things that we used to cope with, and they're especially important during times of sadness and loss. As you know, we've been on a series of sermons. This is number 7, talking about tools and means to cope with feelings of sadness and loss and how to avoid falling into depression. Depression is very difficult for people to bring themselves out of, and it is draining. It is terribly taxing, emotionally, psychologically, and even physically. It can suck the energy out of a person when they fall into depression, and depression has grades or levels. So the lower you go, the harder it is to pull yourself out. One of the coping mechanisms to alleviate these feelings is distraction. To divert your focus on something unrelated to the problems that you face. So think about it now for a moment. What you've gone through. What you've been burdened with. What you've been tested with. Poor health. Broken heart. Going through a breakup, a divorce. And all that it entails. Whether you've had a negative diagnosis at the doctor's office or a negative diagnosis of a family member. Whether you've been demoted at work, whether you've been passed over for a raise, or even worse, whether you have been terminated or laid off. Perhaps even lost a loved one. But there's some relief that we find when our focus is shifted to something unrelated. Even if it's just for a moment, a friend stops by to distract you, to talk about something else, what's going on in their life, remind you of the good times, or stepping out of the office to take a walk, to go to the gym, to exercise, to do something that will bring you out of those difficult moments. Interestingly enough, I came across a journal. It's called Cognition and Emotion. Volume 7, issue number 6, there was a study published. This was some time ago in the early 90s. The title was Effects of Rumination and Distraction on Naturally Occurring Depressed Mood. So this study, the abstract of it basically, is that they took a group of people who were mildly to moderately depressed, and then they took a group of non-depressed patients or subjects, and they were then randomly assigned to spend 8 minutes. 8 minutes. That's about the time of a prayer, if it's quick, by the way. To focus their attention on their current feelings. They took this group at random, depressed and non-depressed, and they asked them to focus for 8 minutes on the feelings and their personal state and condition. They call this rumination condition, where you focus, where you are highly focused on one particular thing. And then they took the other group and they asked them to focus on a geographical location. They say, I want you to focus on your hometown where you grew up. I want you to focus on your destination location for your summer vacation. Focus on that for 8 minutes. They found that the conclusion of the study, the depressed subjects, when they were asked to focus on their problems and their feelings, they became significantly more depressed. And the depressed subjects that were asked to focus on the geographical location for only 8 minutes, that it began to alleviate and to lessen those negative feelings. Essentially, the conclusion of their study supported that distraction can be a positive means to alleviating feelings of sadness, loss, and depression. In our current environment, which goes without saying, we have at our disposal a plethora of distraction. If you want, in fact, we're trying not to be distracted. We struggle to stay focused today. The attention span of most Americans, all of us included, has shrunk down to just a few minutes, if that, for any given thing. Because we have phones ringing and watches beeping, screens flashing at every beck and call of whoever is after us. We have 3 or 4 things running at one time. The camera, a tablet, a phone, a clock, and 200 faces looking at me. The distractions are there. We have games and sports and movies and TV. There's lots of play. There's lots of hobbies. Our culture is supplying us with whatever it is that we want, the good, the bad, and the depraved. So it's important for us as people of faith that when we're looking for relief through distraction from our problems, that we carefully consider both short-term and long-term effects of what we choose to do. We have to be wise. We have to be particular about what we involve ourselves in, especially in those moments of weakness. So listen to this. A very elementary way, simple way, because it's best to keep it simple. In times of stress and anxiety, the simpler the better, is we will categorize, and this of course is mentioned by one of the greats, Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, in his little treatise, Al-Waraqat, categorize all actions and deeds into 5 basic categories. You have the obligatory. What is obligatory upon us as believers? You have the preferred, you have the permitted, you have the abhorred and disdained, and then you have the impermissible. Essentially, al-wajib, wal-mandub, wal-mubah, wal-makruh, wal-haram. These are 5 categories that every single action falls into. We have to be educated as to what these categories are and what actions fall where? We know that our obligations are things that we're rewarded for when we do them, and we are sinful if we abandon them. The preferred actions, we're rewarded if we do them, but not held accountable if we don't. In the middle is that which is permissible. It's neutral, neither here nor there. Like eating and sleeping. And then we begin to look at the other side of the spectrum, the makruh, which is disdained. It is something that is disliked and hated by Allah subhanahu. That if you leave it, you don't do it, you're rewarded. But if you do it, you're not held accountable. You're not punished as long as it does not become a recurring habit. And then that which is impermissible, someone that stays away from them is rewarded, and someone that is guilty of haram is sinful. Every single thing that we do falls into one of these categories. It's important to be versed in our law so that we can know when we need some relief and distraction that we are careful about what we choose. And we should refer to specialists, those who are versed in the law, if it's not something obvious. Look, I lost my job. I'm the breadwinner. I have a wife. I have 5, 6, 7 kids at home. Some are in college. They were expecting me to help with tuition. I have bills that are stacking up and mounting up. I don't know how to cope with these feelings. Believe it or not, in our own community, we suffer from things like addiction. Some of our community members, they are struggling with this difficult test. In these weak moments, they turn to an avenue of distraction. I'll drink. I'll turn to pills. I'll turn to something. Not thinking about not even the short-term effects, but especially the long-term. Considering the above categories that I mentioned, those 5 categories, it's important that you remember that these things are not simply dogmatic and ritualistic. Our law is not meant to confine you for the sake of confinement. It's not meant to imprison you for an exercise. Some people, they feel this way. Islam is restrictive. There's these no's. There's these harams. I want to be free, man. They think it's restrictive for the sake of restriction. But the reality is the nature of our law, divinely inspired, is for our betterment. And there are some serious spiritual impacts that occur when you embark upon any one of these 5 categories of actions. The obligatory all the way down to the impermissible. It has effect on the heart. It has effect on the human spirit, especially when it comes to recovery from loss and sadness. I'll give you some qualifying verses from our book, the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا وَنَحْشُرُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَعْمَى. Surah Taha. He says, and whoever turns away from my remembrance, indeed, he will have a depressed life. And we will gather him on the day of resurrection blind. When you turn away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's remembrance, essentially what it means here is whoever opposes my command and whatever I have revealed to my messenger. Meaning you involve yourself with that impermissible, sinful acts and deeds. They have turned away from it. They have neglected it. They have turned their back on it and chosen a guidance other than that which is divinely inspired. And if you were to follow most of mankind, they would certainly lead you away from the true path. Everyone's doing it. This is what's normal. Following the guidance of someone, something else, that is nothing but negative outcome. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, verily, for him is a life of hardship. He will live a life of hardship. What does that mean? The great imams and scholars from the time of the companions and the tabi'een, they talked about what this means. It's talking about right now in this world. Because it's a reference to the hereafter. We will resurrect them on the day of resurrection blind. So to have a hard life now, a restricted life now, this is where the restriction comes from. It's opposite of what you might think. The law is restrictive. No, sinning is restrictive. It is constrictive. It clamps down on the heart. It tightens your burden by falling into sin. You become anxiety-ridden, filled with stress. Even if outwardly the appearance is you eat what you want, you drink what you want, you sleep where you want, you live where you want, inside it's filled with stress, it's filled with doubt, bewilderment, suffering. The heart goes through a traumatic experience. Looking for distraction with sin, your heart is already in a very, very difficult situation. Filled with worry and sadness, and then you're going to add poison to that, because that's the nature of sin. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned that when the servant, they sin, إِذَا أَذْنَبَ ذَنْبًا نُكِتَ عَلَى قَلْبِهِ, that there will be a dark spot that will form on the heart. With every sin, dark spots will begin to form until they will take over the entire heart. And this is the covering that is referred to in the Quran, Ar-Ran. The heart is dead. No life. Becomes very robotic. Where's the happiness? Where's the joy? Where's the freedom? It's lost. Trying to distract yourself from sadness by way of sin only leads you further down a dark spiral out of control. It may not appear that way, but we, the people of the Quran, we know better. The opposite end of the spectrum, the true way out of depression and sadness, to have a happy life, to pull yourself out of these feelings of loss and depression. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, مَنْ عَمِلَ صَالِحًا مِنْ ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنْثَى وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَلَنُحْيَنَّهُ حَيَاةً طَيِّبًا. Look here. He says, whoever does righteous deeds, whether they be male or female, while he or she is a believer, then we will certainly give them a good life. We will certainly give them a good life. And he says, وَلَنَجْزِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْرَهُمْ بِأَحْسَنِ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. And we will certainly grant them their reward from the best of their deeds. Talking about right now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is promising mankind that if they do righteous deeds, deeds that are in accordance to our tradition, the Quran and the Sunnah, the great pious of this ummah, they have a heart filled with iman, they will be given a good life. They will be rewarded now with an easy life. They will be satisfied with what they have. They will have feelings of tranquility and comfort that will fill their hearts. These are the conclusions of the great scholars from the companions like Ali ibn Abi Talib, Ibn Abbas, and others. Talking about right now. So when you're at your lowest, going through the most difficult of days, and you're looking for distraction, it's absolutely imperative. It is fundamental that you choose avenues of distraction, hobbies, sports, whatever it may be, that are going to be of benefit immediately to relieve that pressure, but they are also going to have a positive impact in the long term. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى ونصلي ونسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. There's two roads always, left or right. You know, when we're at our weakest, when we're at our lowest, we're often acting on nothing more than impulse. We are often acting on nothing more than impulse. When we're at our lowest, we can't think clearly, we can't think straight, we can't see straight, we can't look past the problem that we're in. If we're focused on that problem, as was indicated in the study, they become so focused on the problem, it just is magnified and multiplied. We're acting on impulse. We have to get out of the problem, out of the depression, if just for a moment, so that we can see there is a bigger picture out there. To be able to discern between a positive mode of distraction and a negative one in those hard moments takes a great deal of insight and forbearance. So, perhaps what we do from now is, you know, sometimes we're looking for distractions because we have not adopted lofty aspirations. We're living for those moments that we're in. It feels like that's all there is. So instead of looking for distractions during times of hardship, we should start looking at the hardship as mere distractions from our lofty aims and objectives. To focus on the goal is your way out of those feelings, sadness and loss. Think about this. Our Prophet ﷺ, and all that he experienced of trial and tribulation, of difficulty, he lost his parents before puberty. He was orphaned. You could find struggles before that even. The major struggles, when he accepted or when he was blessed with prophethood, he was attacked, he was run out, he had to leave his home, he went to battle, he was injured, he lost children, he lost loved ones, he suffered financially, he experienced life. The Prophet ﷺ was a man of a mission. He was a man on a mission, a very lofty goal, a lofty objective to spread Islam to the world. How lofty can you get? The Prophet ﷺ was focused on achieving this goal. He remained focused on the task, and because his objective, his aim was set so high, he was able to prioritize the events of his life. He was able to prioritize the events, the good and the bad, for what they were in the grander scheme of what his purpose was. If we can develop and we can adopt, if you will, lofty objectives, we will live a more focused and purpose-driven life and be able to brace better for impact when hardship comes our way. Having lofty aspirations, brothers and sisters. I mentioned to you last week the reality of our communities. Talent, skill, motivation, drive, it's there. The question is, are our aspirations set high enough for who we are? If someone has no education, they have no skill set, they have no abilities, you don't expect much. You can set the target, the benchmark, very low, and you'll be happy if they get that. But when you see a group of people that are accomplished, that have something to offer, it's natural to expect a lot. And the true believer, the lineage, or I should say the heritage of our pious, has always been of lofty aspirations. You do not begin in a little city in the desert, barren. Begin there, and within a generation, within the same generation, a period of 30 to 40 years, you see that expand to cover the East and the West without lofty aspirations. There's nothing preventing us from sharing those aspirations except our own selves. It is up to us, if we want to achieve something great in line with this theme, to help us endure what we will go through in this life and build something for not only ourselves in the hereafter, but for our generations to come in the future. So, bi'idhni ta'ala, beginning from next week, we'll start another series about lofty aspirations, how to develop them, how to frame them, and how to begin to achieve them. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us in this life and in the next, to guide us to that which He loves and is pleased with. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin wa aqim as-salah.